Korah is a character who is rarely mentioned in the Old Testament. The Bible warns us about the dangers of insubordination and rebellion, and Korah's example invites us to reflect on how we respond when we are confronted with questions of leadership and service. The importance of humility and respect for the roles that God assigns to each of us. In an era where individualism and the search for power seem to dominate, this biblical narrative challenges us to trust in God's sovereign plan and to understand that what we desire is not always what is best for us. Instead of seeking prominence or positions that were not designated to us, we are called to live in obedience, honoring God's choices and contributing to the good of our neighbor. Throughout this study, we will explore how Korah's life offers us a mirror to examine our own attitudes. What are the lessons we can learn about obedience and submission? How can we apply these teachings in our daily lives? This is an invitation to look beyond the story and dive into the depths of its message for our Christian walk. Korah was a Levite, a member of the tribe of Levi, the same tribe as Moses and Aaron. The Levites were set apart by God for specific roles related to worship and the maintenance of the tabernacle, the place of worship during the people of Israel's journey through the wilderness. Korah, by his lineage, was part of this special group, with unique responsibilities within the community of Israel. However, even though he had a privileged position in God's service, Korah was not satisfied. He desired more than what had been assigned to him. Korah's ambition led him to question the authority of Moses and Aaron, who had been directly chosen by God to lead the people. Moses was the mediator between God and the people, and Aaron, the high priest, played a crucial role in spiritual intercession for Israel. These positions were unique and could not be filled by just anyone. Korah, dissatisfied with his position as a Levite, decided to lead a rebellion against the authority of Moses and Aaron, and this rebellion was no small one. He managed to gather a significant group of 250 prominent and influential leaders from Israel to support him. Korah's discontent with the leadership of Moses and Aaron was rooted in his belief that all of Israel were holy and therefore should have equal rights to rule and lead the nation. This idea may seem logical at first glance. After all, God had chosen Israel as his special people, and they were all truly worthy and dignified before God. Korah and his followers argued that if everyone was holy and God was in the midst of the people, why should Moses and Aaron be the only ones to exercise leadership? They claimed that Moses and Aaron were placing themselves above others and that this was unfair. The whole congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the congregation of the Lord? Numbers 16:3. However, Korah's fatal error was that he was not simply questioning human leadership. What he was really doing was challenging God's own choice. Moses and Aaron had not placed themselves in these positions of their own free will. God had chosen them to lead and serve the people of Israel. Moses was called by God at the burning bush, Exodus 3, and commissioned to lead Israel out of slavery in Egypt. Aaron was appointed by God as high priest, responsible for interceding for the people before the Lord. Korah's rebellion, then, went deeper than a simple political or communal disagreement. It was an affront to the established divine order. By organizing this revolt, Korah was essentially saying that he and his followers knew better than God about who should lead Israel. This pride and insubordination revealed that the real motivation behind Korah's rebellion was not a desire for justice or equality, but rather a desire for power and control. Furthermore, Korah's rebellion had a dangerous effect on the community as a whole. He did not act alone, but persuaded other influential leaders to follow his example, causing division and uncertainty among the people. This attitude of questioning and dissatisfaction, when not based on correct principles, can easily spread and weaken the unity of a community, generating chaos and disorder. Another important point to consider is that Korah and his followers failed to recognize the gravity of their actions. When they confronted Moses and Aaron, they demonstrated a lack of understanding of the calling and mission God had given these men. Moses, on the other hand, responded to the rebellion with humility, prostrating himself before God in prayer. recognizing that the situation was a challenge not only to him but to God himself. Rather than retaliate or try to defend himself, Moses committed the matter to God, showing his complete trust in God's will. This rebellion is a classic example of how the pursuit of power and prestige, when left unchecked, can lead to downfall. Korah and his followers confused equality of value with equality of role. While all of God's people were important and valuable, not all had the same calling or responsibility. Moses and Aaron had been specifically chosen to lead, and this leadership was not something that could be taken or claimed by others without God's direction. The rebellion was not just a challenge to human leadership, but an attack on the divine order. By attempting to usurp the role God had given to Moses and Aaron, Korah and his followers placed themselves in direct opposition to God himself. This act of rebellion had serious consequences and serves as a warning to all of us about the danger of challenging God's authority and plan, and about the importance of pursuing humility and obedience in our lives. Moses' attitude toward Korah's accusations was exemplary. When he heard the challenge from Korah and his followers, Moses did not react with anger or resentment, despite the gravity of the rebellion. Instead, he fell face down to the ground, a posture of humility and total submission before God. This gesture demonstrated that Moses recognized his own weakness and that the situation was not something he could resolve on his own. He was entirely dependent on God's guidance and intervention to deal with the revolt. Moses knew that his position as Israel's leader was not the result of his own ambition or merit. He had been called by God in a clear and direct way, and his leadership role was not something he had sought on his own. Rather than defending himself or trying to justify his authority, Moses trusted God fully to reveal the truth. He understood that the issue was not a simple conflict of interests, but a spiritual issue of divine authority. So rather than engage in direct confrontation, Moses proposed a way to resolve the dispute that put God at the center of the decision. He suggested that both Korah and Aaron offer incense before the Lord, a symbolic act that represented intercession and holiness. Through this ritual, Moses knew that God would reveal his will clearly and indisputably. He said, "God will show who belongs to him and who is holy." Numbers 16:5. By proposing this test, Moses was placing the final decision in God's hands, demonstrating his confidence that the Lord would defend those he had chosen. He knew that true authority comes from God, not from human disputes. The use of incense in this context was significant, for it represented one of the most sacred functions of the priesthood. Only those appointed by God had the right to perform this type of intercession. Moses also called Korah and his followers to recognize the seriousness of what they were doing. He gave them an opportunity to reconsider their actions, emphasizing that the role of the Levites, which was already a great honor, should not be taken lightly. Rather than cherishing the privilege God had given them, Korah and the other rebels were seeking more power and prestige, unaware of the spiritual consequences of their ambition. This response by Moses shows not only his humility but also his unshakable trust in God's justice. He knew that the Lord had the power to reveal who was right and who had been chosen to lead. Moses did not attempt to resolve the situation with his own wisdom or strength, but sought God's guidance in dealing with the conflict. This teaches us an important lesson about how we should respond when our authority, role, or value are challenged. Rather than reacting with pride or self-defense, we should turn the situation over to God, trusting that he will reveal the truth in his own time. The consequences of Korah's rebellion were as dramatic as they were tragic. After the confrontation with Moses and the demonstration of who God had chosen to lead, divine judgment came swiftly and devastatingly. The Bible gives us a stunning account of how God responded to the rebellion. He literally caused the earth to open up and swallow Korah, his followers, their families, and all their possessions. This scene is described in Numbers 16:32-33. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them and their families, all the men who belonged to Korah, and all their possessions. They and all that belonged to them went down alive into Sheol, and the earth closed over them. This moment was a clear and powerful demonstration of God's power and his intolerance of rebellion against his will. Korah, in defying the leadership of Moses and Aaron, was actually defying God's own authority, and judgment came as a direct response to this act of insubordination. The fact that the earth opened up to swallow the rebels was not only a stunning physical event, but also a clear spiritual sign that God was reaffirming his choice of Moses and Aaron as Israel's leaders. The mention of Sheol in the passage, a Hebrew term referring to the realm of the dead, suggests that the rebels faced both physical death and spiritual judgment. They were literally removed from the face of the earth and taken to Sheol, as if they were being consumed by God's own creation, so that they would never again cause division and disorder within the people of Israel. The severity of this punishment may seem extreme, but it is important to understand what was at stake. Korah's rebellion was not just a struggle for power or leadership. It threatened to undermine the structure of authority that God had established for the people of Israel, jeopardizing God's plan for his people. If the rebellion had succeeded, chaos and disorder would have spread throughout the nation, compromising its unity and purpose as a holy nation. In addition to the destruction of Korah and his followers, the punishment did not stop there. Fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed the 250 men who had joined Korah, those who had improperly offered incense. Numbers 16:35. This fire was yet another clear sign that only those appointed by God, such as Aaron and his sons, had the right to perform the priestly duties. By attempting to assume this role without divine calling, these men paid with their lives. This story serves as a sobering warning about the dangers of pride, unbridled ambition, and disobedience to God's will. Korah and his followers failed to recognize the limits of their role and sought more than what God had given them. The result was total destruction. Rebellion against divine authority never bears good fruit. On the contrary, it leads to spiritual ruin and, in Korah's case, physical destruction as well. Furthermore, this story reminds us of the seriousness with which God takes leadership and authority. Those whom he calls to lead must be respected, for they are acting under God's guidance. By defying such leaders as Moses and Aaron, Korah was, in effect, defying God himself, and this had irreversible consequences. A swift and definitive judgment by God that not only protected his established order but also set an example for the rest of the congregation of Israel. The punishment of Korah and his followers is a reminder to all of us that rebellion against God's will is a dangerous path that can lead to tragic consequences both in this world and in the next. Korah, despite already holding a prominent position as a Levite, was not satisfied with the role God had destined for him. His ambition blinded him to the importance of accepting God's will and respecting the limits he places on him. Korah failed to recognize that the leadership of Moses and Aaron was a divine choice, and when he tried to overstep that limit, he faced devastating consequences. This lesson is directly reflected in our daily lives. We can often be tempted to seek more power, recognition, or influence, thinking that we deserve more than we have. However, the story of Korah teaches us that we must have an attitude of humility before God and accept what he gives us. Dissatisfaction and pride can distance us from God's plans, and the result is devastating. Humility is one of the most important values God expects from his servants. Jesus, the greatest example of humility, taught us that the last will be first, and the first will be last. Matthew 20 verse 16. Korah's pride and overreaching ambition led him to defy God's chosen authority and ultimately to his destruction. This story reminds us that when we oppose God's plans or act arrogantly, the consequences can be severe. We need to be humble, acknowledge our position, and trust that God knows what is best for us, whatever role he assigns us. True humility is not thinking less of ourselves, but thinking less of ourselves and more of God and others. Korah lost this perspective, and his story stands as a warning to all of us about the dangers of failing to accept God's will with gratitude and humility. When Korah challenged Moses and Aaron, he was not just questioning human leaders, but God's own choice. Moses had not appointed himself the leader of Israel. God had chosen him to lead the people. By rebelling against this authority, Korah was actually rejecting God's plan. This attitude can be common in our lives. We often don't understand why certain people are placed in leadership positions, whether in the church, in our family, or at work. We may feel tempted to challenge this authority, thinking we know what is best. However, it is important to remember that God has a sovereign plan, and He places leaders in our lives for a reason. Respecting divine authority is recognizing that God knows what He is doing. This does not mean accepting abuse or injustice, but trusting that God is in control. When we disrespect those He has chosen, we are, in a sense, disrespecting God Himself and His will for us. Just as Korah faced severe consequences, rebellion against God's will can separate us from His life and His blessings. If you like this video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more videos in the cards that appear on the screen. See you next time.